Hello, everyone. Good evening. We're going to get started. I'm Heather Rigg, Gallery TPW's curatorial resident, and we are very happy and excited to be starting our year of programming with a collaboration with Wedge Curatorial Projects. Gallery TPW acknowledges that we live, work, and create on stolen and occupied land, on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of this land that they continue to inhabit today. This land is part of Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant that reminds us all that we share the same bowl and spoon. Therefore, we must take only what we need in order to allow for continued abundance and future viability. Acknowledging the land on which we work and create is an important first step towards unlearning our complicity in settler colonization. However, much more than this needs to be done by settlers, by our government, and by us as arts practitioners to educate ourselves and others, and to endeavor to end ongoing colonial violence. The systemic health, racial, and social inequalities that Indigenous communities were facing before COVID-19 have only been magnified during the pandemic. As such, we've been thinking about many issues at TPW, including inequitable distribution of resources across so-called Canada. The Canadian government committed to eliminating all long-term drinking water advisories on Indigenous reserves by March 2021. However, this deadline is upon us, and there are still over 58 long-term drinking water advisories currently in place on Indigenous reserves in Canada. Many of these have been in effect for over a decade, and a vast majority of them are in Ontario. Two of these communities include the Mississaugas of the Scugog Island First Nation and the Chippewa of Georgina Island. Both are less than a 2-hour drive from Gallery TPW. It is absurd that in 2021, as one of the wealthiest countries that controls about 20% of the world's fresh water supply, Indigenous people in Canada are still being left without access to clean and safe water in their homes. This is because the government and big business ignore the communities recognized in Canada's Constitution and in historic and contemporary treaties. We ask you to continue to make time to pressure the government of Canada until they have fulfilled their commitments. Gallery TPW supports the 1492 Land Back Lane defenders, their allies, who are fighting to reclaim unceded Haudenosaunee land while also resisting acts of violence by the Ontario Provincial Police. Lindsay Nixon's August 2020 report entitled A Culture of Exploitation, Reconciliation, and the Institutions of Canadian Art remind us that Canadian art industries are implicated in colonial violence with our own history of exploiting Indigenous cultural workers and erasure. Gallery TPW is committed to reconciliation, to inclusivity, social justice, and reciprocity in the physical and virtual spaces that we occupy. We are actively working towards best practices where long-term relationships are met with mentorship, support, and care. It has been my pleasure to work with the team at Wedge Curatorial Projects on tonight's event with Antwaun Sargent, Yaniya Lee, and Jorian Charlton. I just wanted to extend a special thanks to Annie Wong and Maria Canelopoulos for their work on tonight's program, which is being presented in conjunction with Jorian Charlton's solo exhibition, Out of Many, curated by Emilie Croning. I hope you all had a chance to visit the online exhibition outofmany.ca, which launched on Saturday. And just a heads up that there'll be a new drop, so to speak, of content happening on the website on February 25th. So please keep your eye out for that. I just wanted to mention that one of my favorite parts of Wedge exhibitions are the publications that they produce. And there's a beautiful one that was created for Out of Many that includes texts by Emilie and Bell Hooks. And you can arrange to have one mailed to you by visiting the website. So I encourage you to please do that. And tonight, as you can see, there's a slideshow of Jorian's work playing just to give you some insight into her practice and to the photographs that are on view in the exhibition. And in addition to the website and to the programming that we'll be doing over the next couple of months, we do plan to install a physical exhibition, Out of Many, at Gallery TPW when the conditions allow, so please stay tuned for that. I'd now like to introduce the artist and curator and tell you a little bit about Wedge. Jorian Charlton is a Toronto-based photographer whose work focuses on Jamaican Canadian culture, foregrounding beauty and style when it comes to contemporary modes of Black representation. Emilie Croning is a curator, artist, and scholar. Her work explores notions around identity and representation through visual language, working at the intersections of feminist theories, post-colonialism, and art history. Emilie worked with curatorial assistant Sydney Barnes-Wright, who is a curious conscience whose creativity is formed through the exploration of storytelling, fusing garment making, photography, and material culture. Toronto-based Wedge Curatorial Projects is a nonprofit organization with a focus on Black identity in contemporary art. Wedge organizes exhibitions and lectures that explore diasporic narratives, identity, and issues of representation. Founded in 1997 by Dr. Kenneth Montague, Wedge was conceived to be both a private and public art experience. The original gallery was located in Ken's home, where it was literally wedged inside the hallway of his loft, with the intent to wedge artists into the mainstream art circles. The organization has since evolved into a curatorial one, producing exhibitions and programming annually. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Kenneth Montague, who, aside from founding Wedge, is an art supporter championing Black identity in African diaspora. Ken grew up in a Jamaican-Canadian family on the border of Canada and America, and his family was one of the first Jamaican immigrants in the community and closely immersed in issues of race and representation. Ken has served on the Africa Acquisitions Committee at the Tate Modern London, the advisory board of the Ryerson Image Center, and the Photography Curatorial Committee at the Art Gallery of Ontario. He is currently an AGO trustee, where he is a member of various committees and is an advisor to the Friends of Global Africa Department. In 2016, Ken was awarded an honorary doctorate from OCAD University. Ken, it's been so wonderful to work with you and your team and to have you here.
Thank you so much, Heather. Great introductions, and it's a real thrill for me personally to be working with you, Noah Bronstein, and Annie Wong over at Gallery TPW. It's a long time coming. We have a long history together with many projects, and I'm thrilled that we have this particular platform to work together with. So thank you, Heather. Big thanks to TD Bank in Canada. The TD Ready Commitment has provided incredible support for Wedge curatorial projects over the years, including this show. So thank you to TD. I want to thank, as always, Maria Kanellopoulos, who has been by my side for over a decade now with Wedge curatorial projects. Variously a manager, a collection manager for my personal collection, a exhibitions coordinator, a curator, and so much more. So thank you to Maria. And of course, big thanks to Emilie Croning, who Emilie has evolved from an intern to basically running things as a curator. So we're very proud of your achievement with this show, Emilie, and excited to hear what you all have to say tonight about an artist who I'm particularly thrilled about, mainly because we've actually worked together before, and now I'm moving to Jorian. Jorian and Sydney Barnes-Wright have worked with Wedge before in a capacity of a small show at the Gladstone Hotel. But this is really the first major solo exhibition of an emerging Black Canadian artist whose time has really come. And it's a very auspicious occasion, and we're not going to let a little shutdown slow us down. So very thrilled for you, Jorian, and feeling excited about tonight in particular. I think it'll be a really important examination of your work. So I'll do a little intro here for our speakers tonight, Antwaun Sargent and Yaniya Lee. Antwaun, I met maybe a couple of years ago at the Art Gallery of Ontario when he was on stage with McLean Thomas in a memorable show and a memorable moment. And I think subsequently we've seen each other at a few events, including the MoMA's reopening. So a thrill to have you here, Antwaun. Antwaun is a writer and an editor, a curator. He lives in New York City. His writings appeared in New York Times and the New Yorker, various art publications. Sargent's the author of The New Black Vanguard, Photography Between Art and Fashion, and that's from Aperture Books, and the editor of Young, Gifted, and Black, A New Generation of Artists. And he's also recently become a director at Gagosian Gallery. There's so much more. Just today, I saw where Theaster Gates posted about an article that Antwaun has written reviewing his show around the Johnson Publishing Archive. It seems every time I turn my head, I'm seeing you somewhere, Antwaun. So a thrill to have you here with us. In your honor, I'm wearing my new Grace Wales Bonner sweater here, trying to keep up with your fashion. So lovers rock. Yeah. So Yaniya Lee is a Toronto-based writer and editor interested in the ethics of aesthetics. Yaniya has written for Vogue, for Flash, for Fader, Vulture, Vice Motherboard, Canadian Art, C Magazine. She was a founding collective member of Mice Magazine. She's presently a member of Emilie. It's a working group. She was artist in residence at the AGO in Toronto. Yaniya has participated in residencies at Banff, the Blackwood Gallery, Gallery 44, V-Tape. In November of 2019, Yaniya Lee and curator Denise Reiner co-convened Bodies, Borders, Field Symposium in Toronto. Then the following year, co-guest edited Chroma, an issue of Canadian art dedicated entirely to Black artists and to Black art histories. Lee was previously on the editorial advisory committees for Fuse and C magazines, and now sits on the board of directors of Mercer Union, a great local nonprofit, and Artist Run Center. And Lee also teaches criticism at University of Toronto and is the senior editor at large now of Canadian Art Magazine. So I want to say that I met Yaniya many years ago, and she won't remember, but at an art event where someone came up to me and said, "This is one of our great young Black writers, and you certainly haven't disappointed, Yaniya. It's been quite a journey watching you rise." So a thrill to have you and Antwaun in conversation. And with that, I will let the games begin. Enjoy. Thank you.
Should we just jump in?
Yeah.
So
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
yeah, thank you guys all for joining us, and for Jorian for these really beautiful images, and I'm really looking forward to engaging in a conversation about them. I guess my the thing that I was particularly struck by was the ways in which you're sort of constructing a contemporary, family photo album, right? And so it sort of uses images that your father shot, across Jamaica, New York, and in Toronto, and then it could have used that as a jumping off point to for your own exploration. And I think that the sort of dialogue that those images are in across space and time are proposes some interesting questions, around the ways in which identity shifts, the ways in which, due to generational shifts, due to what does it mean to be in one's homeland, and all of these questions are bound up in the images. And what's so kind of for me interesting is to see his perspective versus your perspective, and to kind of think through the concerns around different performances of identity and gender and community. And so I'm particularly interested in maybe a question for you is, when entrusted with these your father's photos, how did you arrive at this gesture of, putting your images in conversation with his?
I think it's after I had my daughter, I really started thinking about family albums and family archives, and kind of wanting her to have an archive, for the next generation. Because I feel like a lot of the time, it's when you think about the family album, or just photos from, 80s, 90s. It's usually from like an American perspective, African American perspective. So I don't know. I wanted to have something. I feel like I'm lucky to have these images because I feel like it's kind of hard talking to my dad. So I can't really ask a lot of questions. So having these images, I can kind of get a peek into the past. Whereas my mom, for example, I mean, she's a lot more open. She's exposed me to the culture. I've been to Jamaica many times, but her family doesn't have like an album that I can kind of look through and ask questions. And so, yeah, I just kind of wanted to have an archive for myself that I can kind of pass down. And yeah.
I have one more question. I kind of find it interesting that, he's sort of communicating through images, right? And sort of opposed to sort of language. And I was wondering, did you ever sort of figure out why he started to sort of document sort of the places and spaces that he was in as he was sort of moving through?
I'm not sure. I've always known him to take pictures, but to him, like even asking him questions about some of these images, to him, they're literally just pictures. Like I remember asking him just a very simple question and he got so angry. He was like, why do you keep asking me about these pictures? This is nonsense. They're just pictures. And I'm like, I mean, I feel like they mean something to you. Like you gave them to me for, safekeeping, but he really doesn't see it as like photography or something that's like important. But he documented everything. Like, I don't really know much about like his past, but he did live in the States before he migrated here. So he did leave Jamaica and moved to the States originally and was living in Atlanta, but he's never told me that. His sisters have. And his his sisters and mother, they migrated to New Jersey. So that's where they've been all these years. And when he would travel back and forth, he would go back to New Jersey and New York, and then he came here. But I don't really have any information. I just have these pictures to look at.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting that that this sort of you take on the mantle of sort of photographer and your father doesn't, right? And I think that there's a lot of sort of, and I'll shut up after this, but there's a lot of, that I think that's part of the struggle, right? That's part of the sort of that sort of there has been a long sort of history of us not sort of having access to, sort of certain sort of professional sort of designations or sort of artistic designation like photographer. And so what we have is, these family photo albums that, most people sort of are sort of making sort of subconsciously, but without sort of the possibility of being, supported in, say, a photography practice, right? Which is also just extremely interesting to see sort of what can happen from one generation to the next, right? In terms of opportunity, in terms of sort of the ways in which you're able to sort of realize yourself as an artist. And, and that has to do with the conditions in which, we find ourselves.
I was interested in thinking about maybe what those images did for your dad when he took them, like what they were doing then, and then what images do now. We talked a little bit about, yesterday when we spoke about the circulation of images and this new media landscape. And I know that growing up, for me, I did not have access to images of Black people beyond what my mom would like cut out of magazines and maybe put on the wall. Barely on television. I grew up in like a mostly white neighborhood. And it was over time that I would ask for like subscriptions to the special magazines. And now when I think of people, like now when I think of young people growing up, the networks, it's not so much a professionalization. Maybe that's where I want to interview. And I feel like a lot of these images, they feel personal to me and intimate. Not that they're not professional, but there's a different way in which they circulate. And I was thinking about that when looking at them and trying to consider like what these images might mean for you when you make them and when you share them with the people who are in them, who are so present, and what the images that your father took might have meant to those people if they're, you know, in slides in a box. And it's interesting that he never talks about them, but I wonder if you have thought about that a bit.
I just want there to be more representation of us and have that be, you know, normal. Just like you said, when you were growing up, you didn't really see that. Yeah, so I just want that to be a normal thing. So like I said, for, you know, the next generation, I want them to be able to see themselves. So I'm also interested in photographing, you know, children and like siblings and capturing that relationship. I like to kind of work like one-on-one with people. I feel like I'm quite shy. So I just think having that one-on-one with somebody allows for things to be a little bit more authentic and just intimate in that way. But essentially, I just want there to be more representation of us. Because I didn't, like, even growing up, I didn't really, like I said, my dad never talked about photos. He never showed me those. He's had these for years. He just gave them to me a few years ago. It's like, oh, he handed me this bag and was just like, oh, just keep these slides for me. I'm like, what slides? And then it even took me a couple years to even open the bag and really look at them because he gave it to me like it was nothing.
Did he know that you were a photographer at the time?
Yes, he did, but he's also been telling me to get a job for years. I feel like also growing up in a Caribbean home, art is a generational thing. Yeah, art is not, they're not pushing for that. Like my mom is a nurse, my dad's an engineer, and my mom's been telling me, oh, you know, just do nursing. And my dad is like, do you have a job? So I didn't even think this was something I could actually do. So I never had like an art background. I never really looked at that. It was always like sciences through school. And then when I had always taken photos as a hobby as well. But when I really started thinking about it, I'm like, I feel like I actually want to take this more seriously and, you know, really do this. But yeah.
Could you talk about meeting some of the people? Like these images clearly operate within a lineage. Like they call back to so many great artists, great women artists. How did you encounter photographers like Deanna Lawson or Liz Archer Johnson? What did it feel like to see that, and how did it come into your work?
I didn't really learn like about them until like probably my maybe third or final year in college, taking photography. The very beginning, the only kind of photographer I really knew about was Carrie Mae Weems, and that was like through my own kind of research before, you know, applying to school. So when I did discover people like Deanna Lawson and Liz Johnson Archer, I was like, okay, wow, like I see myself in these images, and I feel like I want to be a part of the same thing. I want to, you know, carry on and have this archive of Black people that, you know, you can kind of look back and kind of like how I'm comparing, not really comparing, but I'm seeing similarities like between my dad's images and mine. And it's not really on purpose, but it just kind of happened.
Well, yeah, I like how situated they are. Like you're calling them an archive, this archive for another generation, sort of similar to the way that you inherited these images. And when I look at your images, I am still, there's something, and it is, I mean, not all of them have that gaze, but the person looking back at me, we're both at the same place at the same timing, and I'm taking them in. And there's something about how you not only take images, but compose them that just like grounds all of time into this one place. Like space and time are connected, and I'm here with this person and I'm like feeling them. And so there's something like wonderful and intense about that. But at the same time, it's almost anachronistic because they are almost out of time because they're so in time. That's a weird way to phrase it, but they're already archival because they're so situated. And I mean, I love that. That's an aspect of the work I think is amazing.
Thank you. I feel like,
go ahead.
No, I was saying, I feel like it just happens kind of naturally. I feel like a lot of people in some of my photographs, I know, so I feel like there's just a relationship there already. Some I don't, or maybe it's my first time meeting, but there's just a like, natural connection. So things just kind of happen. Sometimes I don't really have a plan, and I just show up and we shoot. Yeah.
I wanted to sort of go back to this idea of sort of an archive, right? And sort of talk to you both about that, you know, for a second, because I think in this moment we were so sort of obsessed, you know, with sort of archiving and sort of stealing away our histories and controlling our histories and controlling our narratives and making sure that because there's this history of lack, is making sure that we have plenty, you know, for sort of the next generation. But what's sort of kind of interesting about the stories you tell about your dad, I sort of reflect on my own sort of experience growing up, is that, you know, I might have not seen particularly photographs, right, in spaces outside of my home, the home I grew up in Chicago. But then I would go to sort of family members' houses and I would see these sort of images sort of framed in these sort of, you know, fake sort of gold leaf, you know, frames. And there was something about that coupled with the fact that like every Easter, 4th of July, Christmas, you know, you had to sort of meet. I have an older brother and my mother would put us in the same exact outfits and we would go and we would have to take a family picture. And then as my family grew, it would be the rest of, and it was like, she was so serious about this, right? She never ever talked about the importance of photography, the importance of sort of appearance, the importance of sort of like capturing sort of our likenesses, but she would sort of do this sort of ritualistically. And then we would, you know, then we'd get the photos and then we'd give them to all the family members, but then we'd also frame them, right? And I don't think that she thought that she was building an archive, or I don't think, you know, it's similar in the ways that your dad sort of was sort of operating, but there was something sort of there was this sort of necessary impulse that sort of guided that sort of, you know, those gestures that I think really is one of sort of language, right? It's sort of, you know, brought up, you know, you sort of were thinking through Bell Hooks in the exhibition and sort of the ways in which she's thinking about sort of the home and the ways in which that she sort of is thinking about sort of those images, you know, in the house that she grew up in the South in America, really sort of, you know, sort of performed a sort of oppositional gaze, right, is what she sort of calls it. And I see that sort of in your photos, but you know, but it's in this sort of way, and where that sort of comes from, you know, even if you think about Dina's images or Carrie's images, or, you know, even someone like Renelle, or, you know, sort of these women, I think that comes from sort of that sort of intimate sort of looking that happens in spaces like the home, in spaces, you know, like a bedroom or in a kitchen, for example, as in this, you know, photo here. There, it is less spoken, but it's seen, right? And it's sort of enacted, right? Which is sort of why I could see that, like, you know, from one generation to the next, I think we've gone very sort of, we've taken cues to sort of think about sort of how do we sort of sort of create sort of archives or sort of link our archives to institutions or sort of create our own institutions, artist-run spaces and, collector-run spaces and things like that, that really sort of turns this sort of happenstance, right, into a real sort of field of appreciation and study, right? Because we have so many practices, across the diaspora that are sort of undervalued, right? That are sort of dismissed, not just by sort of institutionally dismissed, but are also sort of in some ways dismissed within our own communities because of sort of that, the ways in which sort of institutions and other sort of magazines and museums and things like that sort of have said that our images are not of value, and so, or at least the ones that, are considered the ones that sort of record our, who people are sort of in a broad sense. And so, yeah, and so I was just sort of kind of interested in that sort of the ways in which we see an archive and the ways in which like the previous generations see sort of the amassing of, photos in the photo albums or on the walls or whatever, in these sort of particular ways, these sort of gestures of care, but that we're sort of seeing them in very different ways, I think is really sort of interesting.
Me, Emilie and Sydney were talking about that before, like seeing a picture in a photo album of like, a family member, your grandmother or something, and you show them and you're so excited, like, wow. And like,
you're like, tell me more.
Yeah, and they're looking at you like,
exactly, yeah.
It was like that was a Tuesday. Like, I don't know. Like,
I'm interested in how they also, these images or this new generation of images, as you're outlining, Antwaun, we're learning to look differently almost. So you do look differently at an image that's in an album or on the wall at your mom's house than you would at an image that has a similar like vibe, as I was trying to describe before, when you're in a gallery. And what does it mean? I don't know, these images hold their own, and the people, the subjects in them hold their own. There's something so powerful about that. And it seems to me that in the way that you photograph people, you're giving them the full presence. Like, I can feel you in this image, what you described, like that you have oftentimes a close relationship or your subjects. Yeah, it's like you allow them space, and in allowing them space, it forces us as viewers to see them differently. And I think that does something for people who are in images. I think Black people, they've been taking pictures of us for a really long time, but this kind of ownership of it, which we talked about, let's say in your father's generation, where it happened at home in family albums, like inside, now it's happening outside. You're a professional, you're showing this, and how, now I'm going off, but I often think about the vulnerability of Blackness and like, how are we gonna present it? Because like, it's one thing to speak to your people, but when you put it in the gallery, anybody can come and look. And I feel like you've really endowed your subjects with like self-protection. They don't need any protecting. They're totally fine. And that's something in your craft or your eye or something.
I guess to follow up on that is, can you talk a little bit, because I think where that sort of is situated is in sort of the ways in which you sort of are thinking about sort of the ways that you construct images, sort of like the posing and the sort of fashion and sort of those sort of elements that really sort of create sort of a mood, a vibe, sort of a sort of certain sort of oppositional gaze. So I was wondering if you could talk about how so someone like Dina, she knows exactly what's going to happen, in the photo, right? Before she even sort of meets anyone or she comes upon a subject, she knows exactly what she wants them to do, right? And I was wondering if you could talk about sort of your process of sort of producing images.
Like, I'm the opposite. I have no idea. Like, I may make a mood board, sometimes I don't, or sometimes the person I'm shooting might make a mood board and we might have an idea, but I never really know what's going to happen when I actually go and we start shooting. And I feel like I'm also very quiet when I'm shooting because I just want the person to just do what they do. I don't want to, I will direct in some way, but I feel like if I just allow them to kind of do their thing, it just makes the photograph all that more authentic and just, you know, natural. I like to keep it simple. I do like to play around with, you know, wigs. For example, there's a photo of her name's Kiosha. Usually when I see her on Instagram, you know, she might have braids or she wears her hair, you know, natural. And I wanted to show her looking just a little bit different, something that you don't see on her feed, or you don't see her looking that way. So we put her in an orange wig and she was like, not really sure. But she's like, it looks cute, but I don't know. And I'm like, let's just go with it, see what happens. And by the time we started shooting, she was just like, okay, wow, like actually, like I love this for me. Like, but I like to experiment a little, but I never really have like this well thought out plan. Like I want this to look like this. I want to put this here. You know, I just play around with little props. Like I might have a wig or, you know, maybe a specific pair of shoes or something, but never really like plan to a T. But yeah, and I just go and we see what happens.
You know, even, I mean, one of the things that was said was that, you know, we are learning to see different, right? And I think that is a total, I think that was so sort of accurate. But also we're learning to sort of do photography different, right? Like what you just described in terms of the ways in which you are really collaborating, right, with subjects, right? In a way that, you know, sort of different older generations or different generations, or even just different photographers among this generation, you know, don't necessarily have that sense of collaboration. And I was wondering, why is that sort of sense of collaboration between you and your subjects important to your practice?
I just want, I don't want to, I want the photographs to come, like Yaniya said, she can really see like that person's true, I feel like, essence in these photographs. So I don't want to do too much. I don't want to do too much like manipulating. I want things to come off as natural as possible. I feel like that's just my, I guess that's just my style and what makes me feel comfortable. Like I don't want to, I want people to be very comfortable when I'm photographing them. Whether they're somebody I just met for the first time or even a friend, because like you said, it really is a collaboration. So I feel like that's the best way to approach things to get that result that I want. Just to have things be very simple and natural and like really let the person who's being photographed, you know, come through. Yeah.
Well, there's also the sort of the way that you use light is sort of interesting. And the way that you use light in a lot of ways to create mood, you know, and to sort of, I was wondering, I mean, it's just so, you know, really, 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 really strong. And so I was wondering if you can sort of talk about your use of light, which is, you know, that's what photography is, right? Lighting.
Exactly.
But I wonder, it just seems so distinct and so sort of considered that I would really sort of, I was wondering if you could just sort of share with us.
Well, in terms of light, of course, if I have natural light available, I will definitely go for that. That would be ideal. There are situations where I do light. For example, the photo that I was just talking about, sometimes I will have some sort of lighting, but when I can, I like to use natural light a lot, especially photographing Black people. I feel like that natural light.
Let them shine.
Yes, that natural light. I feel like you can manipulate it more and be a little bit more experimental. But I guess in being experimental, I also like to mix natural light with, you know, artificial lighting as well. But yeah, when it's possible, I really try and use natural light. Sometimes I'll switch cameras and I might use like a little point and shoot, and I like to use flash on that, but I feel like I also still like to keep it as natural as I can, and not harsh when I'm doing flash, but for the most part, I love to use natural light. Yeah.
And I guess just to extend, this isn't a question, but I love the light as well. And they're almost classic portraits. You have the sitter and an image, and they're tight often, like you have the body and you can't see too much of the background. And because of the way that you use light and colors and often the clothes, like I'm curious about who chooses what, if that's you or the people they bring their own, but it creates its own atmosphere. Again, I think that it's almost not claustrophobic, but it's really intense. The colors that you choose, the lighting that you choose, it all becomes like solidified into this object when you look at them. There's nothing loose, there's nothing out of place. It feels like it couldn't have been a second before or a second after.
Usually when it comes to clothing or anything like that, I will have the person choose. I might have an idea like, oh, maybe we can do this kind of dress, or, you know, that's when the mood board kind of comes in, or the pictures of the two girls, the sisters. I'm friends with their mom, and I'm like, hey, do they have any little dresses? And she's like, oh my goodness, I have the best dresses. Like, they'll be perfect. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I didn't really know what they looked like, but I'm like, let's just see what we have and just work with that. So usually the subjects will choose their clothing, and yeah, we just go from there.
One of the things that it's also interesting is like the ways in which you're sort of playing with notions of intimacy in the images, from what and it's like different sort of notions, right? There's like friendship, there's sisterhood, there's some brotherhood, there's, you know, different sort of notions of love, you know, sort of, you know, on the spectrum there. And so I was wondering if you could sort of, how are you sort of considering intimacy and sort of the sort of representation of that in your photography?
I feel like, for example, like Black sisterhood, I feel like, I don't know how to describe it, but a relationship with like a Black woman is so different than, you know, having a relationship with somebody else. So for example, two of my friends, Jem and Mickey, specifically, I feel like maybe they seem like they could be a couple, but I like that, you know, that mystery. Like, I mean, they could be, they could not be. And really, you know, it was two best friends. And I was like, I feel like I want to, you know, shoot them both together and kind of play around with that, because I feel like the relationship between two Black women is so like different. I don't even know how to describe it, but I'm thinking like relationships that I have with other Black women are so different from relationships with anybody else.
It's unique.
Yeah. So I like playing with the idea that, okay, maybe they're a couple, you know, maybe they're not. And I'm also, I don't know, I'm more interested in just relationships in general, like whether they're friendships or they're intimate relationships. I want to capture that as well. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I anything else. Yeah.
I mean, the other sort of obvious sort of thing here is sort of the sort of notions of, presentation, right? And I think that like that comes out in sort of the ways in which, the figures in the photographs are sort of posed, but it also sort of comes out through the way that they're dressed, right? And I think that, what's so interesting about sort of this generation of photographers, our generation of photographers, is that that clothing, much like the camera itself, has just really sort of become this sort of way to sort of explore not only sort of even formal concerns, but also sort of social dynamics, right? And so ideas about sort of what it means for this particular body to sort of present themselves empowered, right? Or present themselves as sexy, or present themselves as, whatever that they're sort of trying to go after. And I was just wondering, because I do see that as sort of something uniquely generational. I do wonder, how are you sort of, is it, because even in your father's photos, right, there's this sort of pronounced sense of style, right? And we could sort of talk about why that is, and and sort of what sort of things we could control, right? We could control the home, and so we put pictures of ourselves on our walls, right? We could control the way we dress, and so we made sure that it was a real expression of who we were, as individuals, right? And so I was wondering, sort of, how do you see style operating in your photos in relationship to your subjects?
I feel like when I look at my dad's photos as well, I feel like there's so many times where I'm like, oh, I kind of want to recreate that look. But it's so, I don't know, that's a good question. I haven't really, I guess because I feel like a lot of the time, even though I am incorporating like, fashion or style, I feel like it's still kind of documentary based. So, I mean, I do think about the fashion, but I also think, like, for example, my dad's photographs, like, he wasn't really thinking about that. And not that I'm trying to, I guess, emulate that in any way, but I do think about it more. Whereas, like, in, when he was taking images, or when I'm looking at these images, it's just natural. That was just the fashion of the time. And I don't know, sometimes I find myself wanting to, recreate some of the looks, or, finding similar like colors or tones, because some of those styles, of course, like, have come back. And I don't know, I don't even think I answered the question.
No, it's sort of really interesting, because I remember it's really interesting because I remember having sort of a similar conversation with Micaiah Carter, the photographer. Micaiah Carter, and how he became a photographer actually is because his father was in the army, and he would just take a camera with him and just take all these photos, and would just sort of a constant sort of documenting, right? And he sort of came upon his father's photos, right? His father would not call himself a photographer, but he had sort of amassed this, sort of collection. And one of Micaiah's first projects was sort of this journey through his father's images, right? And it's the same time period that your father was actually creating, right? You have this real sort of sense of sort of like generational concerns. You have a real sense of sort of the ways in which, all of these notions of like, gender, sexuality, how sort of people express themselves, like how does sort of like, in terms of like, how do you sort of self-empower, right? Like, and how does that show up sort of in the body on the street, right? And how that sort of changes, from one generation to the next is all there. I just think it's endlessly fascinating because, even sort of outside of sort of photo-based practice, right? Like you think of people like Amy Sherald, right? Who's obviously a painter, famously painted the Michelle Obama portrait. Like her whole, her sort of her painting practice is based on photography, right? Based on these sort of photo albums, right? That she sort of would look at growing up. And that's why there's sort of it's a grayscale, because it's sort of it's sort of a play on these old black and white sort of photos, right? That she sort of encountered as a child, There's also someone like Gerald Lavelle, who's younger, 28-year-old painter, who sort of does these impasto paintings, who also, when you ask him, what is sort of the inspiration or what is the source material for these images, he also talks about how his grandmother had all these photographs, right? And he would be like, oh, can I have this photo or that photo? His father actually passed away, and he wanted a photo of his father, and his grandmother was so protective of these images that she was like, no, like you cannot have any of these images, and because for a lot of people, though, that is the sort of family, documentation. That is how you sort of keep the family together in some ways, right? It's like through these images. And so for you to even sort of, although these images in some ways are staged, for you to sort of keep this idea of documentation sort of at the center of your practice speaks to sort of this idea of like sort of photography being the democratic medium, and right, and for for Black peoples, that playing a role in sort of making us real, and I think that is just, that's sort of amazing, because like photo is this sort of Black archive, this Black family album is really at the center of so much of Black artistic production today. Should we take some questions?
I was thinking,
Yeah, I was thinking that too. We have a couple. I'm just gonna get my laptop. Don't be scared.
I can read them. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah.
The first one is from Sydney Barnes, right? It's a question for all. Do you feel like it's critical to have digital space and platforms for images of Black bodies and culture? ? In regards to archiving film and Black photography and existence, can the internet be a safe outlet for documentation?
I remember when I first got Instagram. I'm a latecomer to everything. So it was very late, but I just followed Black people, like my friends, but then these accounts. And in the beginning, before, I guess there was more people in my feed, it was just this place where I would go in the mornings and scroll and just see so many images of Black people. And I hadn't had that. And it felt like the most special place and thing. And I do think there are, I don't know if the question asked for safe spaces, but I think there's a circulation of images of Blackness that makes me feel good in a way that I didn't, again, when I was growing up or seeing images of Blackness, they made me feel funny and I was unsure. And it's like, am I related to that? Am I not? Like, if it wasn't inside the home, the representations of Blackness that I saw were most often not produced by Black people. And so that's, maybe another facet of this. It seems like online, with our ability to produce these images ourselves as Black people and Black creatives, we can also share them. And that's, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing to me as somebody who looks at images and feels changed by art all of the time. Like it's definitely made a difference to me.
Just going off of what you were saying too, it's like, as much as there is this level of toxicity with, a platform like Instagram, you do have the power to create a safe space for yourself and, and surround yourself by images and content that does give you that feeling, right? I don't know. Jorian's work also does that for many people.
I feel like I agree. I feel like the internet can be a safe space. I feel like if Black people are creating the images of other Black people, I feel like that's what allows for a safe space, or like a more, I guess, I don't want to use the word authentic again, but like a real representation of us online. So,
Mhm. I mean, my sort of thought, I mean, I'm sort of come at this a couple of different ways. One, you wouldn't have the sort of proliferation of images authored by young Black people being paid attention to if you didn't have a technology like Tumblr, Twitter, and Instagram, right? And so because I think that like one of the things that we and to be clear, Black people are early adopters to technology, right? So we are early adopters to places like Twitter and Facebook and things like that, right? And Instagram, right? A camera, is a technology, right? And so and our sort of history with the camera goes back, to sort of the advent of it, right? You have someone like Frederick Douglass in the 1860s, where there was a civil war in America, giving lectures about sort of photography being a democratic medium, right? And because he so felt as though, and at that time, it's a very early technology, right? It would take some more decades to sort of get the calibration right? So you can shoot Black people in ways that did not, make us look funny, etc. But like I think that like this question of technology is really tied up with our ability to sort of control our images, right? Our ability to sort of produce the images we want to see, because institutions have so readily failed us over and over and over and over again, right? And so I think that like, whether it could be like for me, I'm like, we've made it these spaces for ourselves, right? Because we've had to, because we've been locked out of certain institutions, right? I think that like, and the story's the same everywhere, right? You like in New York and Chicago, whatever, in Toronto, it's like one of the things with, when Micheline's show was there, one of the things that was sort of expressed was that like there's not been women, sort of Black women in that museum in that way, right? And there's not been Canadian Black women in that museum, right? Which is also the case with photography in general, right? Like the fact that you are authoring these images as a Black woman, that is a rare thing that happens in photography, right? Most image makers that are even Black image makers that are platformed are usually men, right? And so this is a rather new experience for us all. And so to have different voices, right? Have their images valued and taken seriously. And I think we only sort of gotten there is because you guys got to a critical mass on places like Tumblr and Twitter, and you built followings on Instagram and all of this stuff, that the institutions would be, either they were going to be rendered irrelevant, or they were going to sort of get on, sort of board and try to figure out, sort of what are the concerns of this generation. And so I think that like, that is just so important, like, and to just be totally sort of clear, it's like, they've not done enough, and I think spaces like this and the internet sort of help to sort of push the conversation forward, because you have to make demands on sort of those institutions. And I think the internet is one value system that Black creatives have used, I mean, just remarkably to their benefit. The next question is, do you feel that these subjects this is for you, Jorian, do you feel that these subjects have changed your view as an artist? Have you learned about yourself in this process, and what type of artist you aim to be?
That's a good question. Okay, what's the question again?
Do you feel that these subjects have changed your views as an artist? What have you learned about yourself, and what type of artist do you aim to be?
Artist do I aim to be? mean, I don't feel like my subjects have changed my view as an artist. I just I'm trying to think of this. Give me a few minutes.
Okay.
There's one for Emilie. Maybe we'll.
Okay. Yeah.
You curated the show, so curious about your thoughts on what happens to the family album when it moves into the gallery. Do these intimate images act to unsettle the space, or does the space shift the images themselves, reproducing them as artworks, or both?
I would say a bit of both. It's like a push and pull. I find that there are instances in which, you know, especially if we're in the quote unquote white cube and interacting, I mean, that's the thing, you kind of lose that interaction of the family album because it's presented in a way like, whether it's a framed photo, you lose that tangibility. But, you know, and that in that way, the object itself loses a little bit of that edge and that authenticity of it being, you know, an intimate family photograph. However, there's, you know, once it is placed in a public space as well, you're allowing for, you know, you're allowing for dialogue and conversation to happen, and, you know, creating that, you know, that aspect that, like, what makes it relatable. I mean, what's interesting is that even as we're sitting with Jorian's image, with Jorian's father's images, like when we were sorting through all the slides and some of the photos, you know, there's a lot of photos that reminded me of the old photos that I would see of my, you know, my mom, my aunts, and my grandfather and my grandmother in Jamaica as well. That, you know, I don't know too much of that portion of their lives. I don't know, you know, like my grandfather passed away when I was young. So these images are what, you know, I hold on to as well, and looking through them, you know, and I only have access to that when it's out of, you know, the private space, right? So it's really interesting, although, you know, you do lose something when you're presenting it in, you know, in a gallery or in a private, you know, when you're presenting it publicly, because you want to be able to feel and touch and, you know, turn the pages of an album. There's, you know, there's so much to be told with a single object, with, you know, a photograph in that way. You know, like the creases, like there's not only is there time that is paused within, you know, the context of what's being photographed, but then also just the object itself. So yeah, it's a little bit of a push and pull, and I think there's something to be taken away from, you know, either, from either. So that's, yeah.
There's another question. Let's see.
I would say,
I was wondering if Jorian could speak of the importance of the context where the images are taken. Some images seem to be in a studio setting, but in most of them, the subjects seem to be situated and somehow portraying a strong connection and narrative to or with that place. They inhabit space in powerful and intimate ways. The person is asking, could you speak to sort of your decisions around sort of some of the images being taken in studio and some being taken sort of in sort of natural sort of environments?
I guess with that, if it can be, I feel like I like to photograph people like where they're most comfortable. So sometimes I feel like that is at home, or like, you know, someone's bedroom or wherever. So I feel like mostly when I photograph, I do aim to go into that person's home or just go into their space. Sometimes it might be my space as well, but mostly I do like to be in that person's space, because I feel like it allows them to be more vulnerable, and like I said, whenever I'm shooting, I feel like it's more of a collaboration. So I feel like I want to give the subject that freedom, and for them to be the most comfortable, and also make decisions. And I don't know, I guess it depends on the type of shoot. If I were to shoot in a studio, but I do prefer to be, like on location, if it can be outside. I love that, but I do like to be in the person's space. Yeah, I prefer to just be in the person's space because I feel like it just makes things, it makes me comfortable as well, but I think it makes, allows people to be, I guess their true self when they're at home, or yeah, that's it.
Just going off of that, we also have a question. How does Jorian go about making her choice between digital and analog mediums? Because you do use both, and both are featured in the exhibition as well. Does that affect the type of work that you produce?
Yeah, I feel like I've been wanting to do film for a few years, but I just never really got my hands on anything. But as of lately, like the past few months, I've only been shooting film. But yeah, lately I've only been shooting film and only been wanting to shoot film, but I will go back and forth depending on what I'm doing. But I feel like a lot of the work that I have created lately has been like more personal. So I feel like I choose film. And I mean, I was kind of going back to my dad's album, and I guess just looking at film more. I've just kind of been wanting, I guess, sort of to refresh my work in a way, or just maybe evolve it in some way. Because yeah, I always shot digital, but film was something I wanted to do more of. So yeah, I decided, okay, let me start, and I've just been doing film ever since. Yeah.
There's a good last question. I messed up the order over here, but I think it's a nice way to finish maybe with your father again. So somebody asked what your father thinks of the project, and does he see his images differently now that they've been presented in the context of an exhibition in relation to your work, no less?
Honestly, I have no idea, because not only is it hard to talk to him, if I send him a message, he will not answer me. So I sent him the link to everything, and he still has said nothing. So either he's viewed it and he's just not going to say anything, or he hasn't looked at it yet. I literally have no idea. I asked him maybe 2 days ago. I was like, "Hey, did you check it out?" And he's like, "What?" So I'm like, "The link. I sent you the link. It's the work, the show." And he's like, "No, I have to look at it on the computer," because I sent it to him and I said, view this on your computer, your laptop, whatever. But yeah, so there's a chance that he still hasn't seen anything. But I feel like he will look at it eventually, and he probably will not say anything. So I may never know. But no, I do want to ask him about it, and if he has looked at it, and what he thinks about seeing his images. But yeah, I have to drag it out of him basically. So yeah, I don't know if he's seen it.
One day.
One day.
Yeah, that's a fantastic place to end. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks so much for I wanted to say thanks to Chin and Wedge and Gallery TPW for having us sort of all talk. I think that, like, you know, these spaces are so important, and I know that we could sort of, you know, this stuff, we sort of are seeing a lot of it. And I think, you know, meaning we're seeing a lot of young image makers sort of make their concerns known. And I think that, like, you know, that is just super important. And for us to be able to sort of continue to be in dialogue and continue to sort of talk about and discuss images and really sort of deconstruct them and really think about sort of the moves, both formal and social, behind them are just, you know, extremely important. So I just want to thank everyone to, you know, tuned in, but I also want to thank, you know, both of you for being, you know, sort of in dialogue with me.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and say thank you to both of our speakers, Yaniya, Antwaun, and of course to Jorian and Emilie. Lots of insight there, and I am going to encourage everyone to visit the website outofmany.ca. I'm also giving a little plug for Antwaun here. If you don't have it, people, get the book.
Are those, turn it to the side, turn it to the side. Oh, wow.
Yeah, those are actually artists that are actually in my wedge collection. So there's a lot of synergy there. So, and a couple who I'd like to get into the collection. But
wait, like,
you know, this Antwaun's great book that you know, Jorian could easily be in this book. I mean, if you know, if he'd come up to Canada and done a little research up here, he would have had Jorian in here. I just have to say it, because there's a synergy and there's a feeling, you know, Jorian's part of that new Black vanguard.
Where's Jorian?
I have to say it.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And, you know, there is a particular way I'm thinking about including you in that, in the exhibition, actually. And so, I mean, you should be getting an email about that, but there is, yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, I think that the book, just to sort of defend myself or something, you know, I think the book is a starting point, you know, like, and I think that, like, Jorian is a part of the conversation, and I think that, you know, others are as well. And I think that, you know, it was just at that time, you know, it's a snapshot of what is a larger movement, you know, of photographers really sort of working in ways that sort of think about history, but also about their own concerns and the way that they see the world. And so I think that one thing that is sort of ever evolving is the exhibition. And, you know, as we've gone on, we've been able to add more photographers, and, you know, just trying to capture a larger sort of slice of sort of what's happening. And so, you know, we're doing a show this summer in France, in Arles, and I told them to reach out. I told my team to reach out to you, so they will, to include you in that exhibition. But,
yeah, that is Jorian for the win. Jorian for the win. All right. Yeah, thank you, Antwaun. Also, I guess you've noticed I did a little change of clothes here.
Yeah.
Now I've got my Puma Jamaica out of many sweat top here. So this is the Jamaican national logo, with, you know, the motto is out of many one people,
right,
from which the show's name was derived. So I had to represent Jamaicans. Put up your fist, boop, boop. And I want to say thank you again for, you know, all the attendees, and, you know, I'm just thrilled that so many people participated and came on to view this tonight. We learned a lot about the work, and please, again, so many great events happening in the next few weeks around Jorian's show. Please visit either Gallery TPW's site, Wedge Curatorial Projects, or go to the outofmany.ca and join us again. Peace and love to everyone. Thank you to Annie for hosting, and we will talk soon. Enjoy. Good night, folks.
Thank you.